when I first started this podcast, obviously I knew October was Domestic Violence Month, and I knew all along one guest that I wanted to have on to talk during Domestic Violence Month, and that was very close friend of mine from high school. Her name is Deborah Shannon. So you're going to meet her in just a few minutes, but I want to set the stage for everybody to kind of give you a little background on where I'm from. And I'll set that stage and kind of tell you that for this reason. So I was at a wedding a couple of months ago. I was dancing. I was having a great time, drinking some wine, and went to the bathroom. I was standing there with another one of the ladies, and she looked at me and she's like, "Oh my gosh, we were calling you Buttoned Up Girl. We were calling you Buttoned Up Girl. And then we looked over and we saw how much fun you were having. And we're like, Buttoned Up Girl can have a good time." And I went back to my boyfriend and I was like, "Man, they just called me Buttoned Up Girl. Man, that's interesting." And I realized, like, yeah, maybe there is a little bit of a lot of me right now that is buttoned up. When I did Samantha Bush's podcast, I went back and looked or listened, and she said about me, she said, "You're always so poised and put together," which is crazy for me to hear. And a little bit, I think I have to be this way now. I've got 2 kids, 3 dogs, a cat, a full-time relationship, going from job to job. I pay my own bills. I kind of do all that stuff. So I think there is a sense of me that has to be buttoned up and has to walk on a razor's edge in order to get all this stuff done. But I will tell you this, kind of getting back to what I started, it is a complete 180 from where I was when I was in high school growing up. Complete 180. And I don't say that lightly. When I tell people where I'm from, things that I've gone through in my childhood, they don't believe it. Like, literally do not believe it. Because the high school that I went to, and when I was in high school, I wrote this out, right? I was a complete mess. I was a pretty bad kid. I was wild. A lot more wild than just the quote unquote wild. Terrible grades, alcohol, drugs, fights, all of the things that is so far away from quote unquote buttoned up girl, right? So I was that kid, and I hung with that crowd. I would love to say that we were on the edge of out of control, but that would be a lie, because I think that we were totally out of control. We didn't have any rules. We did what we wanted when we wanted to do it. And it was the 90s. So hell, we could get away with it back then, thankfully. I grew up in Sunrise. So Sunrise, Florida. It's located about 10 miles west of the Atlantic Ocean, about 30 minutes north of Miami. And Sunrise, from a glance, probably looks and sounds like a middle-class neighborhood. It's located close to some retirement communities. Sawgrass Mills Mall is right there, where all of us kids worked in the 90s. We all had jobs at Sawgrass Mills Mall. And we're pretty close to the beach. So, when you look at it, when I tell people where I'm from, everybody kind of says, "Oh, that's awesome. South Florida must have been such an awesome place to grow up." But for me and many of my friends, I think it was anything but awesome to grow up there, because, yeah, they were all of those things, the beach and, good living and all that stuff. But as I mentioned, there was also drugs. There was also fights, and there were teenage gangs where we grew up. Many of us were on our own because our parents were working. We were low income. Parents had multiple jobs. And so we had to take care of ourselves and fend for ourselves. We would come home to empty houses. And of course, we found our way to each other. So when I mentioned the gangs, I did a little Google search, because people are like, "Oh, gangs, right, in South Florida." But in the 90s, it was a real thing. This is what pops up. Sunrise and Broward County, Florida, experienced an influx of national gangs like the Latin Kings, Bloods, and Crips, alongside local groups. The one that went to my high school was called La Familia. There were a lot of people that I hung out with and my friends. And this led to a rise in organized gang activity, which expanded from urban centers into suburban areas. I lived right next door to the head of the gang unit when I was in high school. True story. The head of the gang unit was my next door neighbor. We didn't thrive. We survived. That was South Florida in the 90s. And some of us didn't. Our high school, which is, by the way, Piper High School. Shout out Piper High School. I have my stuff right now. The principal there has completely turned that school around. I went and visited. She has done amazing things. But when we were there in the 90s, located right next to a water filtration plant, so you could smell that as soon as you pulled up to the school. We had asbestos throughout the hallways throughout the entire school when we first started. So we had classes in portables. And yeah, a lot of us did not have a lighthouse. We didn't have a beacon. We didn't know what was right, what was wrong. We just kind of did. And I don't think it was our fault. I think our parents worked a lot, obviously. And when 16-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids are dealing with divorced families, they're dealing with being poor. They're dealing with bullying, which of course happens in every single high school. I think they're going to find others who are going through the same thing, and they look for an outlet. So when I left Fort Lauderdale in about 2000, I left and I did not go back. It was very painful for me to think about my childhood, growing up. I didn't want to remember who I was. I wanted to hide from that sort of time, which in retrospect, I now embrace it. But on September 16th, 2012, in the early morning, I was laying in a bed in Chicago. I was out there for a NASCAR race and my phone rang. And it was really early. I don't remember if the name popped up or if it just said 954, and I answered it because it was South Florida. But it was the sister of one of my best friends from high school. I would say my best friend from high school. Deborah Shannon is my friend's name. Her sister's name is Vicky. I said hi, and Vicky sounded, really upset. And I remember like it was yesterday what she said to me. She said, Mario shot Deborah, and then he killed himself, and we don't think Deborah's going to make it. And so I'm just trying to call some people who knew her and loved her and were her really close friends to let them know. She told me that she had been shot with a shotgun. We'll clarify this with Deborah to make sure. And that the pellets were all through her lungs and she had a 1% chance to survive. So, I think that call rallied a lot of people who knew Deborah. I think it rallied a lot of people who were from that area, because I'll tell you one thing about the kids that I went to high school with. We may have had a very tough go at it, but we protect each other at all costs. And we did that when we were in high school. And we certainly did that when Deborah Shannon was almost killed. So Mario and Deb had been dating for a long time. They had a young son. And of course, she was fighting for her life. So as I said, October is Domestic Violence Month. And a lot of us know someone who's been the victim of domestic violence. Some might be survivors yourself. So I thought that this was a really important story to tell, because while there's different levels of abuse, while there's different levels of domestic violence, I know someone who has lived through the highest level of that. And I think it's really important to share her story, something that she hasn't done.
Welcome to the show where dreams take flight.